Hello readers, I'm Amy and I'm your nonfiction feminist. Today I am talking nonfiction feminism. So if you haven't watched it already, up in the cards I will link my fictional feminism discussion where I talk about fiction books that have feminist topics, feminist characters, all of that good stuff. So today we are focusing on nonfiction feminism. At the beginning of my fictional feminism book, I did discuss my own definition of feminism. So since I've already done that, please go to that video if you would like to learn more about that. For the intro to today's video, I will be talking about my name as the nonfiction feminist. So I worked on the title of my channel for, say, a week or two. If I really want to come up with a good title, I need to sit on it for a bit. And I was playing around with different names that might relate to feminism since I felt that was probably going to be one of my main focuses for my bookish channel. And eventually I came up with the nonfiction feminist. I like kind of the alliteration there with the fiction and the feminist part, but I'm thinking nonfiction feminist. Like, I'm a feminist. That's a fact. That's not fiction. And if it's not fiction, then process of elimination would say it's nonfiction. So I felt pretty clever coming up with that name. It also shows that I do tend to read a lot of nonfiction compared to what I would see as the average reader. My idea of the average reader is that they don't probably read a lot of nonfiction because the idea of nonfiction is that it tends to be very dry, which again is something that many of us on BookTube are trying to change, and we're trying to get people to read more nonfiction. So that is my little nonfiction feminist spiel, so let's get on to the nonfiction feminism. To start us off, I have Bunk by Mary Roach. Mary Roach has done lots of science-y nonfiction, and I picked Bunk specifically because it talks about sex. It's the curious coupling of science and sex. This book, I've heard some critiques in that it doesn't necessarily have a conclusion, which I would agree with. Each chapter is exploring kind of a different area of sexual research. It's not like a full paper where you have kind of the abstract and the conclusion. She's just giving us information for the sake of giving us information. So there's not necessarily an all-over lesson to this book like there would be in other nonfiction or in a fiction book. But I love this. This was the first science nonfiction book that I ever read. I read it because of the sex and gender focus of my psychology major whenever I was in college. I found it very readable. The science isn't very dry at all, and she has these really funny footnotes. Not everyone finds them that humorous, so it might be, I guess, very specific to American humor. I'm not sure, but I find her humorous and relatable, and the reason, besides just the sexual main topic, that I chose this for nonfiction feminism, besides the fact that you have a female doing research, the thing with researching sex is that people, generally speaking, are afraid of the female body. In order to do research of any kind, whether that's medical research, science research, animal research, what have you, you have to have funding. You have to have money. You have to have money to fund your people and your products and everything that goes into researching things. It is really hard to get funding for sexual research. Beyond that, it's also difficult to get people to do the research on. And part of this book, one of the chapters that she wrote, was her taking part in some research. I don't remember what the exact research question was supposed to be or what they were exploring, but basically she and her husband had sexual intercourse while getting an ultrasound. And that's really hard to find someone to take part in, and that's going to be really hard to get funding for. So that's what's feminist about this, is that she's helping put in research on women's bodies, and she's discussing the need for research on women's bodies, considering that the female body is one half of the reproductory miracle that is childbirth and reproduction, you'd think we would have more research on it. For all we know, the, for lack of a better word, gunk that is in the female vagina could have a lot to do with, say, how quickly sperm gets to the egg or how much sperm survives on its way to the egg. But we don't really have a lot of research into that because it has to do with the female body, and that's just a place that people don't want to go. But if we did research into that, we could seriously help a lot of couples that are struggling with infertility. So, yeah, that's one of the many topics that's explored in this. You also get to research pigs or read research on pigs and how orgasms might help them have more piglets. Just all this crazy science, sex stuff, and it's really interesting. And so I chose this for a nonfiction feminism book. Also, not the first thing that people think of when they think of feminism. This book is The Masculine Self. This is a book that I had to read for my Men and Masculinity class in college. People don't tend to think of men that much whenever they think of feminism. You hear feminism, you hear female, feminine focus, you think equality, oh, women want equality. Well, some men want equality too. And The Masculine Self really explores masculinity and what goes into this idea of the masculine man and how that's harmful to men. Not all men are going to be into football. Not all men decide to start fights to solve their problems. It goes a lot into the psychology of men and the psychology of male groups and how that plays into masculinity and how toxic masculinity can be. And also how good certain parts of masculinity can be for men. You can tell I really got a lot out of this book. I've got all my little post-it notes here. This is my most highlighted book ever. I actually think it's really pretty to just flip the pages. This was also, it was one that was very readable. It's not as textbooky as a lot of college books are. There's certainly a lot of articles that are referenced, and you've got the reference list in the back. But it didn't necessarily read like a textbook. It was more readable than that. I don't really know what to compare it to. Next up, this book you've heard me talk about so much lately, Selfish, Shallow, and Self-Absorbed. 16 writers on the decision not to have kids. This is a series of 16 essays. They flowed very well together. The writers themselves were very talented, and this is discussing the fact that not having kids is just as much of a choice as having kids. You do not have to have kids to be a real woman, to make a real family. Physically having kids, adopting kids, fostering kids, whatever, it doesn't have to happen for you to be considered a real person in society, in spite of what many people think. So, yeah, I'm not going to go on another huge rant about this, but suffice it to say, it is beautifully written and on a very important, not often discussed topic. Next up, we have Periods Gone Public, Taking a Stand for Menstrual Equality. This one really goes into different companies that are trying to make periods more affordable. It discusses the kind of economy of periods and period care for people who are homeless and that they might have a really hard time with that. It discusses someone in, I think it was India, who made a machine of their own to make pads. I'm not sure if they did it to make tampons as well, but if you watch the Period documentary on Netflix, they also go into that company. Talks about, going green with your period and different menstrual products that can help you help the earth while having your period. So lots of period topics discussed in this. Periods are, of course, a very feminist issue and a huge part of our journey to equality. I think it also discusses free bleeding at one point in here. It goes into all of the period stuff. Again, very readable. This one is a really good option for people who like to read newspaper articles. I found it very newsy. It was kind of like one big newspaper article. So again, very readable. If you really like reading newsy stuff, this would be a good book for you. And won't talk about this one too much because I do have a dedicated review for it, which I will link in the cards, but this is Three Women by Lisa Taddeo. It is up for the Goodreads Nonfiction Award, or Best Nonfiction of 2019 Award, or something like that. I did vote for it. This explores the lives of three women using second and third person perspectives. It is not written like anything that I've really read before. It could easily have been done very, very poorly, but Lisa Taddeo did an amazing job. It reads a lot more like a fiction than most nonfiction that I get to read. Highly recommend. And lastly, I also talked about this in a recent video. I have the Radium Girls, The Dark History of America's Shining Women. This is super feminist because it's talking about the forgotten parts of history, or one of the forgotten parts of history, which is the Radium Girls. During the First World War, a bunch of girls were hired on by companies around the US, possibly around the world, but right now I'm going to say around the US, to make radium watches. And they would put the paintbrush to their lips, then they would dip it into the radium and paint the watch, and then dip it back into their lips to make sure it was nice and pointy. And they might have done that after the radium. But the point is, they were eating radium. They had very little of it at a time, but a little bit at a time really adds up. And whenever these women had x-rays, their bodies were glowing, and no one did anything about it. And it made me furious to read this because I'm thinking, why the hell didn't I learn about this in high school? Why didn't I learn about this in college? Why are we missing these stories in history? So highly recommend. Again, this reads more like a fiction where it'll talk about, like, it was a really sunny day and she was walking down the sidewalk with hope in her eyes, or some such thing. It has things like that where it doesn't feel like the stereotypical dry nonfiction. So again, really, really recommend this for a great read. And that is it for my fictional feminism list for right now. I might try and do one of these every year and make it a regular video and just have it be like a regular recommendations video. So yeah, happy Nonfiction November. Hopefully you will pick up some of these books and love them as much as I did. Please like, subscribe, be my friend on social media, leave your hate comments down below, after which they will promptly be reported and deleted. I post every Wednesday, Sunday, and I will see you all in my next video. Bye, friends.